Thank you for joining us today on Blunt Talk at 420 Friendly. Today we are addressing a random history question involving the history and challenges of banking in the legal cannabis industry. 420 Friendly opened on December 31st, 2014, and at that time we had no banking options. Now, if you're just looking for a quick answer on whether or not we can bank, the answer is yes. We have been able to have limited banking abilities for the last 9 out of the last 10 years. If you want to know about the challenges that we have faced and continue to face, then stay tuned. Going to be a little bit of a bumpy ride. The first couple of years of getting into this industry, from the time we won the retail lottery in April, May 2014 to the time we got open in December of 2014. And that first year is a complete blur. Alyssa and I had no investors. It was just the two of us. And even though I had been a small business accountant for about 17 years at that point, and we had a really solid background in that arena, we didn't really know what we were getting into. In fact, none of us that won that retail lottery knew exactly what we were getting into because we really weren't given a ton of guidance. We were giving a whack and said, these are the rules, and there you go. So in 2014, banking was still not allowed in the industry. In fact, within 2 weeks of opening our store on December 31st, 2014, I received a letter from my bank, Washington Trust Bank, that said, in effect, "Dear Miss Earhart, it has come to our attention that you have been licensed by the Liquor Control Board to become a licensed marijuana retailer. Effective immediately, all of your accounts have been frozen, and you have 30 days with which to come in and formally close all of your accounts." Now, I didn't have a business account at Washington Trust Bank. I did have a personal account that I had had for, since 1997. And not only did they effectively freeze my account, they started bouncing everything. They bounced the house payment, the water payment, credit card payments. They started bouncing everything. They completely froze everything. Apparently, they were scanning the licensure, public record, of who was being licensed and who wasn't, and my name popped up, and they decided the best course of action was to freeze everything. In those early days, everything had to be paid for in cash. Now, in Washington State, all orders from vendors for product have to be paid at time of delivery. So all of our deliveries were paid in envelopes of cash. Our employees were paid in cash. All of our regular bills were paid in cash. All of our maintenance bills were paid in cash. But the area that was most difficult was the taxes. Now, in Washington, at the beginning, there was a 25% excise tax that was imposed on each of the 3 licensure categories, those being producer, processor, and retailer. So each of those categories paid 25% of their gross revenue to the Washington Control Board on the 20th of the month. In June 2015, the excise tax changed to what we know, or to what it is today, which is 37% of all sales collected at the register by the retailers, in addition to sales tax. So, depending on where you live, the amount of tax that is collected is dependent on that region's rate. But prior to that, we each paid an equal amount of percentage of gross revenue. Now, I'm not exactly a naive person, and I have been a small business accountant for a long time. And for some reason, looking back, I guess I was a tad bit naive. And there were a couple of things that happened in those early days that really told me that the state of Washington wasn't as supportive of this industry as I had naively thought they would be. And the first inkling of this was how we paid the taxes and what occurred when we paid those taxes. So let me back up just a little bit. There were a handful of us that were retailers that were initially licensed. Green Star, Green Nugget, Green Light, Green Leaf, Satori, Top Shelf, Cannabis and Glass, Sativa Sisters, Treehouse Club, Cinder, Locals, Mary Jane's, and us, 420 Friendly. And once we all won the lottery, quite a few of us actually would get together on a regular basis to discuss how we were going to handle some of these things. One of the topics of discussion that was most common during those days was, how are we going to pay the excise taxes? Now, again, being a small business accountant, I remember the old days where we used to pay payroll taxes with a coupon. We would calculate how much we owe, we would write a check, take a coupon to the bank, make a deposit, and the taxes were recorded as paid. And I brought this up at one point, but here's the kicker. The bank that the LCB used would not accept money directly from us. We had to pay the LCB, and the LCB could then deposit that money in the bank, which meant that we had to drive to the LCB once a month to make those tax payments in person. For those of you that aren't familiar with Washington State, Spokane, Washington is approximately 30 miles from the Washington-Idaho border. Olympia is clear on the other side of Washington State, on the west side, south of Seattle. From door to door, from our store to the door of the LCB, is 316 miles. If traffic is great, should take us about 4 hours and 40 minutes. Anybody who has been in Seattle knows the traffic is never great. To add to the possible traffic issues, we are also dealing with a couple of passes, meaning that in the wintertime, it is not uncommon for Snoqualmie, for instance, to be closed and unpassable due to weather. And finally, we have this little situation of carrying a whole bunch of cash, and if we were to be pulled over, the police would have the authority to confiscate said cash. We were told by the LCB that under no circumstances would any excuse for not paying on time be allowed, meaning that penalties would accrue regardless of why we didn't make it there by the 20th of the month. So we sat down with the other retailers and tried to come up with ideas on what was the best method to get from point A to point B every month. I know a couple people considered and actually did fly. And I actually called the airport and called TSA and asked them about flying with large amounts of cash. Visions of DB Cooper ringing in my head. But for Alyssa and I, we decided our best option was to drive. Then something rather alarming happened. The first stores in Spokane County opened late June, July 2014, and our local newspaper, the Spokesman Review, would put out an article each month stating how much revenue those stores that had been opened had generated for the state of Washington in excise taxes. Not the grows, not the producers, the stores. So each month there would be an article that said XYZ company owed XYZ amount of money, and they would be driving it from Spokane to Olympia on or before the 20th of the following month. Now, obviously, this was a little scary. We felt like a target was being put on our backs by the LCB and the Spokesman Review by releasing that information in such a public manner. So I wrote to the LCB and said, "What in the daylights are you guys doing?" Now, I don't know how many newspapers, besides the Spokesman Review, was publishing that information on a monthly basis. But our concern wasn't just for our safety, but our employees' safety and for the delivery drivers that were carrying product from the producers and the processors to our stores so that we could sell, because they were also being paid in cash. The letter that I received back from the LCB was not our problem. That was basically what they wrote. Not our problem. It was a matter of public information, and so therefore they were entitled to publish that information on a monthly basis. Now, again, I've been an accountant for quite some time now, and I know that I cannot call the Department of Revenue today and say, "Hey, I want to know how much Walmart made last month in revenue," because it's none of my business. It's not my company. However, the LCB, in their infinite wisdom, thought that this was completely an acceptable practice. Now, while I understand that it is public information, I still maintain to this day that the only way that that information should have been given out was by a FOIA request, not just because they didn't want to have to deal with those FOIA requests on a monthly basis. We did not anticipate it being the wild, wild west. And to be completely frank, I had nightmares that we were driving across the state and would be, held up or ran off the road or, who knows what, because it was known how much money I would be having in my vehicle, or that we would be carrying across the state, and approximately when. So what we did was nobody, and I do mean nobody, our family, our employees, nobody knew when we were leaving to go make that payment. We left in the middle of the night. We left the day before. We left early in the morning. We did random days. Sometimes we deliver on a Monday, sometimes a Wednesday. We took different routes each time that we went over. So, taking a page out of our old summer camp days, we would pack a bag, put the money at the bottom, top it off with some feminine hygiene products, and put it in the car. Sometimes we took my car, sometimes we took Alyssa's car, and we would make the drive across the state. Now, I will admit we had some pretty funny adventures, like the time that we got stuck in some serious traffic in Tacoma and we stopped at Olive Garden. I believe I had about $6,000 in cash next to me at Olive Garden. And because we were dressed down and trying not to be too obvious, we couldn't even get the waitress to serve us a bowl of soup. Another time, we were told that we were allowed to camp on the beach because apparently they thought we were homeless, but it turns out we were just paying our taxes. So we did this for approximately, 11 months. And when we got to the LCB, the second time or clue that the LCB wasn't maybe as supportive of the industry came into play. Each month, I would call a day or two in advance to schedule our appointment to arrive to make our deposit. And when you got to the LCB, you would pull into the parking lot, you would walk in through the doors, and it was basically set up like the whole center was like a waiting area, and all the offices kind of went all the way around. So frequently it would be like me, you know, and me and Alyssa, and maybe a couple of grows or other retailers, and we would all be sitting out in the open in the middle of this foyer type area at the LCB, and individually we would be called up to make our deposit. And if you've ever been to the movie theater, or maybe a drive-through at the bank where they've got the bulletproof glass and they got the little drawer that slides out, so all the LCB people were behind this bulletproof glass, and they would push out the little drawer and we would put the money in the tray. They would pull it back and they would count it and give us a receipt. And it always struck me as insincere that the only people they were concerned about were their employees and not ours. To the best of my knowledge, nobody was injured or robbed or anything during this time. But I do think that that was more luck than anything else because, quite frankly, we all had bullseyes, targets on our backs during that period. And we're just fortunate to have not had anything serious happen. Now, we also had to make another tax payment because the Washington Department of Revenue, which would be our sales tax and B&O, business and occupation tax, would be due on the 25th of the month. So after we have driven across the state and back, we would schedule an appointment with the Department of Revenue to make our sales tax B&O payment. Now, in the beginning, we had questioned why the Department of Revenue wasn't just collecting our excise tax. I mean, they collect everything else. Why can't they collect the excise tax also? And what we were told at that time was that the Department of Revenue refused to accept the excise tax payments, which is why we had to drive across the state, because they weren't receiving a cut of the revenue. Now, this comes into play because every major city in Washington state has a Department of Revenue. So it was completely unnecessary for all of us to be taking our lives into our hands every single month to make that drive when we could have just driven to our local office. So, as I stated at the beginning of this, our biggest challenge was payment of taxes. Everything else we could pretty well work around with signing receipts and so forth to exchange cash. But it was the payment of taxes that were the biggest struggle. That included payroll taxes, which had to be paid on a quarterly basis because we couldn't do an electronic funds transfer as required by law. So we had to send money orders. And of course, you are limited as to how large of a money order you could get. So we would have to get multiple money orders over multiple days to come up with the correct amount to pay for our payroll taxes, which we would mail to the IRS, who in turn would then penalize us for failure to pay electronically through our bank account that we did not have. We got our first bank account in November of 2015. So it was approximately the first 11 months that we played this cash game with making vendor payments, payroll tax payments, excise payments, and so forth. 9 years ago, it was a handful of credit unions that saved the day and took a chance on the cannabis industry. Thank you so much for joining me for this little walk down memory lane. So, to answer the initial question, do we have banking in the cannabis industry? And the answer to that question is yes and no. Yes, we have bank account. We're able to pay our taxes now online, direct deposit to our employees, write checks to our vendors, etc. But no, we're still unable to take credit cards at a cash register and other normal business things that any other industry would be able to do. So the answer to that question is yes, but we have a limited availability of services. I hope you've enjoyed this. I will be exploring other topics that arise over the next few months. If there's anything specific you want me to address, let me know. And yeah, in the meantime, have a great day and we'll see you soon.